auctions in Melbourne, a very prominent thing. And I know realestate.com, Domain, they'll always put it at a much, much higher rate than SQMs. Like SQM take into account properties that passed in, properties that get listed afterwards. So the agents will report certain things just to make the market look healthy, right? If they bump up those numbers, then the market looks healthy overall. But the gold standard for clearance rates is SQM. It's free information. You can go and check it out. That's the one that we use, and we have used it for a long time. So yeah, it is the one to check when you're wanting to look at what the market's actually doing. So just on the way that he's graded that. So if it's 60 plus, it's a healthy market, and you're looking at, what was it, 10% annualized growth?
Plus 10% plus.
Yeah, that's considerable. So do you know what the results were for Stonington Boroondara, like at that price point?
At the 1.5 mil.
So yeah, you mentioned 1.5. So what was it? What were the clearance rates?
So the clearance rates overall for the entire of that inner Melbourne, all of those LGAs put together, was 51.66.
51.
Though,
okay, cool.
Though it's worthwhile actually talking about the individual LGAs because they're very different. So Port Phillip in 2025 and the end of 2024, I've seen has struggled more than the other LGAs, and that is dragging that clearance rate down. So it's a smaller market as well. So they only had 6 auctions scheduled last week for over 1.5, which is small.
Yeah.
Only one sold. So they had a 16% clearance rate in that particular market. Yarra was at 66% clearance rate. Boroondara.
So were they a lot of apartments? Because Port Phillip has tons of apartments, right? Like through St Kilda and all that area.
Only one apartment.
Okay. Interesting.
Only one apartment, which was on Beach Street in Port Melbourne. And then the others are 150 Richardson Street in Albert Park. Gorgeous road, gorgeous street in there. That was just passed in and re-advertised. Moray Street in South Melbourne, passed in and re-advertised. And this is another thing, and this is why I thought it's interesting to maybe just go through some of these results, because it's really tied into underquoting. And this is why I find these emails so helpful, because a very dead giveaway, if a property is underquoted, is not just if it's sold and where it sells, but if it doesn't sell, where is it re-advertised? That is a huge measure, because to me, what it's re-advertised at is usually the reserve or close to the reserve. So it's finding out where that reserve lies within the quoted range. So if we looked at 4 Rainsford Street in Elwood, I could tell you that it was quoted 2 to 2.2, but it was re-advertised after the auction at 2.275. So 75 grand above the top end of the range, which is like not out of the question. It's not ridiculous, but that is just a result that we've seen. And then some others, like one of the apartments was quoted 2.15 to 2.25, but it was re-advertised at 2.24. So $10,000 below the top end of the range. So not underquoted. So it's very easy to see what is happening with the market. It's very easy to see what's happening out there. And I find it super interesting, because when we've been doing this for a while, you start to get a really good understanding on what agents quote in what specific ways. And there's some offices that will quote consistently with reserves in the range, and some are consistently $200,000 below. Very important information when you're looking at the market, just to try to get like a good understanding of what's happening out there. Just to go through as well, Boroondara, so they were at about 50% clearance rate. They had 29 auctions on the weekend, just gone above 1.5 mil. No like insane results, like nothing was selling 15, 20% above the listing. And then Stonington had the strongest with 62.5% clearance rate of 16 auctions, so 10 sold. I mean, they had a couple reasonably large results. There was one actually in Glen Iris, quoted 175 to 185, sold for 2.11, which was 14% above the top end of the range. That was an interesting property. It was a 2-bedder, probably a knockdown. So that just shows you the land value is at around that 2.1 in that particular market. But again, I think it's really interesting to just keep an eye on all these things and see what's happening. And that comes into the underquoting changes.
Yeah, yeah. Underquoting, yeah. It's definitely a thing of Melbourne, of Victoria. A lot of agents have started to transition to Melbourne now with their like investment purchases and just the opportunity that is here at the moment. And they don't know what the market is. They don't know how the market transacts down here, and they're coming unstuck. So that's, people either relocating, buying investment properties, buyers agents as well. just don't know how this market operates, because it's very different, like even street to street. Because if it
Mm.
changes to a different location and a different market, that another agency or another agent will look after. So they all have their patches. And we've seen it like literally cross the road, and it's a very different market. If you don't understand how that operates, you could get caught out. Like you could assess a property, you could see it listed at 8 to 880, and yeah, it sells for 1.1. And that's normal for that particular market. You go across the road and they quote 9 to 950. And it's a very similar type of property, but it might sell within the range, for instance. Like
Mm.
if you go further out east, things typically sell within the range. There's not as many issues with underquoting out there. And it's
It
hard for
depends
my
where.
brain to compute those numbers, because I'm so used to just adding on some additional tax or a bit more sugar on top when I look at a price, especially
Mm.
if it's in the NRE. So I see something that's 1.5 to 1.6. It's okay, this thing might sell close to 2. And you look at
Yeah,
a property
literally.
out there and it's 8 to 880, and it's I don't know where this thing's going to sell. Is it going to be 800? Is it going to be 850
So interestingly, I
initially?
caught up with a client on Saturday, and he was telling me that he's got a friend. So we're looking for them in Glen Iris at like with 2.2, and he was telling me that one of his friends just bought in Glen Waverley, and they had a similar budget, and he was comparing the markets, and he's, oh, what's happening out there? It looks like the market's flying. It's going ridiculous. Like my friend that was looking in Glen Waverley, he saw this property quoted 2 to 2.4, and it sold for 2.8. It was 400 grand over the top of the range. Is that what we need to be looking out for in Glen Iris? And I'm like, no, there's completely different markets. And I was like, Glen Waverley, Mount Waverley, expect 2 to 400 grand of underquoting. That's just the standard. It's just what happens in that market. I've seen it that way for a long time. And then that market is very different to looking in a Glen Iris or Ashburton, or it's very different as what you're seeing in Outer East if you're looking in like a Ringwood or a Croydon. Just completely different markets. And price points are affected very differently as well. So typically like under a mil, I feel like there's less underquoting. And they're also just more private sales, which is just a completely different market
Yeah,
in its
for sure.
entirety as well. But
So these new laws, or yeah, they're enforcements, right? They actually they pass these laws, and this is what they have to do when they're creating a statement of information. So, statement of information in Victoria, every single property that's listed for sale has to have an SOI, like statement of information. And if they're running an open, it has to be displayed somewhere. So they have to
correct.
have, they're normally on the kitchen table or the island bench. That's normally where they just put it with all the other stuff, like the contracts and things. But the previous ones didn't have enough information. Like they were good in theory, much like a lot of government things are good in theory. The execution is always what fails. And essentially, it was to catch these people out for underquoting, which would be even limiting the quoted range to 10%.
Mhm.
So that's why you always, if I quote something, especially if it's Victoria, it'll be like 8 to 880, because it has to be a 10% range. So a
Mhm.
million, it's 1 to 1.1. Doesn't have to be the 10%. They can use 5%, they can use 1%, they can have a single number. So that has to be on there. And then they have to, if they can find them, and this is the loophole that a lot of people used, was if it's sold, like a comparable property is sold within the last 6 months within a 2K radius. Was it 2 or
Correct.
4? Yeah, 2K
Two.
radius. Yeah. So that means subject property, 2Ks around that property. If a property had sold that was similar to that, they had to list that as a comparable property within 6
Mhm.
months. And 6 months is too long. Like it's still 6 months at the moment, but that's too far from a comparable, because we've seen markets change in a week, in 2 months, and 6 months is a considerable amount. And also the location of it. They don't have to take into account that this property, subject property, is in a court, or one that's sold on the high street, or one that's sold on a main road like the Princess Highway. They don't
Yeah,
have,
yeah.
they can use that same property, right? So if you've got something that's in a cul-de-sac, like in a court and a very quiet street, and then the agent has used a comparable which is sold at 1427 Princess Highway, that they can use that as a comparable, and naturally that's going to have a massive discount. So they can put that in, and it's a way that they can lower that price. And the reason why they do that is to create activity. And all these poor buggers that rock up thinking they're going to buy this property for 800,000 and it sells for 1.2 million, they're all the horror stories that you hear. First home buyers, you hear anyone that's trying to buy a property, the affordability of the market is cooked. I think this is one of the core reasons as to why that happens,
Mhm.
because people just keep missing out because of the underquoting and because of their evaluation skills.
Correct. Yeah. And so this is what they're trying to change. That's what they're trying to update. So what James has just gone through, that's pretty much been the reality of the Melbourne marketplace for multiple years. And it was interesting. So this was a note published by Consumer Affairs. They said that, and that's talking about the initial changes. They said since its launch, the underquoting task force has received more than 5,000 complaints through its dedicated underquoting web form. And more than a quarter of these complaints allege that agents use unreasonable comparable properties. So just what James was saying, like the main road example, comparing to a court. But then more than a third of complaints have come from other agents, showing that many in the industry are committed to fair and lawful practices. Either that's the optimistic take from Consumer Affairs. I think it could be trying to wipe out your competition with some harsh fines as well. And
100%.
I think the most I've heard complaints from underquoting is just agents talking about how other agents underquote, which I find really funny. But let's look at what the actual changes are, what the specific things that they've made that are different, and we'll see if that is going to affect you or not. This is just another note from Consumer Affairs talking about the changes and why they've put them into place. So they said, under Victoria's underquoting laws, estate agents must select 3 recently sold properties in the local area to compare against when setting a reasonable estimate of a selling home's price. These comparable properties are also listed in published statement of information, which you can find when you're going through a property, usually inspecting the dining table or something. The underquoting task force has found some agents were ignoring the most similar properties sold in the local area, instead choosing properties that differ in one or more important features and sold for a lower price. This can mislead potential buyers. Apparently, some agents were doing that in Melbourne. Who knew?
Yeah. And it's, yeah.
And who knew the wisdom of the government, right? And they've said, so when selecting comparable properties, agents must already consider the standard condition, location, and sale date of recent properties, but the refreshed guidelines add new factors that agents must consider, including whether the properties are renovated or unrenovated, build status, such as fully built homes versus vacant lots. So that's like real groundbreaking stuff here. And then if near identical properties in the same estate or apartment complex have recently sold, and similarities or differences in school zones, proximity to the shops, and other neighborhood features. So I think that they've definitely increased the standard, and I can go through what the actual guidelines are. So that's a note from Consumer Affairs, but then available on the Consumer Affairs website is a note from the Victorian government, which is the director's guidelines for determining these features, which goes into it in a little bit more detail. So they've essentially, the changes are they're trying to force agents to use the most comparable properties, which is the big issue with underquoting. I've got a feeling that it's going to be very hard to police and actually understand. But again, let's go through it. I'm keen to hear
Yeah,
what your
adding
thoughts
a
are.
complexity to it is
Literally.
required. Like they need to do it, but then it makes it harder to police as well, because some of these things are so subjective. And I know that's what you've found in the notes as well. But yeah, whether a property is renovated or unrenovated, like
Mm,
I get that. But there's good renovations and bad renovations. Like we've seen a property renovated before that was like terrible, and it would probably actually be a negative to the
yeah,
purchase.
it's
But anyway,
the landlord reno.
correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
before putting it online. So this is what the actual director's guidelines state, that the following matters must be taken into account when considering the standard and condition of comparable properties. So the external construction, which I think makes sense. Like if you're comparing a brick property to a weatherboard, there's some differentiators. And if you're comparing a concrete commission home to a new build down the street, which you will find in a Ashburton or Frankston or wherever areas,
Yeah.
the age of the property. So again, I think that's just relevant. That's a fairly easy to police guideline. The architectural style and layout. So that's where it just falls flat to me. Like comparing architectural styles is very difficult. Even talk about the heritage properties, because there's a lot of heritage properties in the inner Melbourne. The difference between an Edwardian and a California bungalow,
Yeah,
like,
that's exactly where my mind went, to be honest. Yeah, in the Gascoigne, right? The least sought after would be a Calbung. And then you've got, yeah, some Victorians, you've got some Elizabeth, like Queen Elizabeth facades, and then you've got the Edwardians in
mm,
there. And then the Calbungs are definitely the last. There's some Art Deco stuff in there as well, but yeah, and that is like very subjective, right? And you wouldn't know that. Like no one would know that if you're just walking around the street and you would say, why is that one priced at 5 mil and that one's at 6 mil? It's so subjective and how they're going to police that. Like architectural floor plans, again, if you're going into these older areas, it's okay. Has the rear laundry been removed from that and like they've opened that up to be the kitchen and living? Like a lot of these unrenovated, and there's not many of them around now, but these unrenovated 1920s, 1930s homes where they had no real access and connection to the backyard. A lot of people, when they've done those renos, have moved that laundry, moved like bathrooms and things like that from the back of the house to the middle of the house, and then turn that into the kitchen and dining that flows onto the outside of the place. So again, like that type of stuff is so subjective. It's
So subjective, man.
yeah. So
Like I love watching all the renovation. I love watching renovations essentially. Like the amount of time I spend watching people renovate homes and period homes in particular. And I'm not necessarily watching the block on TV or anything, but I've got many a YouTube channel that I watch renovations done on. And I find it so interesting that like looking at the absolute war that happens in the comment section on some of these renovation videos. And usually it's people saying you've completely destroyed the character of this home. You've completely killed it. And a lot of people will renovate to make properties more modern. And then everyone's, no, I love that 1970s bathroom, as if you got rid of those pink tiles. Like they've got so much character to them. And it's so subjective. Imagine this getting to a court where they've tried to find an agent for using a different architectural style or layout that he thought was more comparable to another one or something. And then it sells way above the range. Maybe because the layout that he's chosen is a more modern one, but the market for this particular home says that they actually prefer the unrenovated one. And then all of a sudden there's a major underquoting instance. It's just so hard
yeah,
when
it's
you're
like the
getting
Hill
that
Street
level.
property, right? Like that Hill Street
Correct, yeah.
is like the floor plan is shit. Like if you looked at it on its merits for a floor plan, it's
Yeah.
horrible. You know what I mean? It
If
doesn't even
if
have walls in
Metricon
the
came
bedroom.
out with that design, I don't
Yeah,
think
yeah,
anyone's buying it.
yeah. Like it doesn't even have full height walls in the bedroom, and it's 2 bedroom property. But yeah, like you look at that, and it's you have to take for what like its uniqueness into account, and that's what creates the value because it is very unique and it's
Mm,
scarce. Like it's only one. There's only one of those types of properties. So again, that's going to drive price.
yeah.
But yeah, anyway, I think it's the complication is good, like adding these things, but man, it's going to be difficult, especially that one. I think that's going to be the hardest.
That's one. Some of the other ones that are easy, floor size of the dwelling and land size of the property. So look, that's been a big issue where two agents are like, oh, they're comparable properties, but one's got 400 meters more square of land. So
Yeah.
it's, come on, what are we doing here? A number of bedrooms, bathroom, and car park spaces just is so blatantly obvious. And then another one that they've said you must consider is any special features, such as a swimming pool or tennis court. But what's a special feature? Is it having a pizza oven, barbecue area, and al fresco undercover with a fire pit? Like,
Mm.
where do you like that's just going to be borderline impossible.
Yeah. And some people don't want to pull. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's really 50-50 in Melbourne if people want to pull. So yeah, if you put it in, if you actually put that in yourself, you've done that for what you want to have. You want to enjoy that pool. And if you're selling it, there's a lot of people that have had pools previously and they're like, I'm not buying someone else's pool. I don't know how they built it. Like it could be
mm,
a problem. So they want to put the pool in themselves. So it could be, again, a negative to the property, but they're in this light. I'd imagine that they're saying it's a positive. You know what I mean? Take that in consideration as a special feature. The property's worth more. Not always the case.
yeah, it's definitely not the case. So that's the property side. Then they've got the location aspect. So they said the distance from the sale of the property, which is pretty obvious. Zoning and street frontage, neighborhood features such as proximity to shops, transport, schools, parks, business, and industry. So I think they're trying to get, and the next one is the properties are in the same or different school zone because that's a major quoting difference. So it's good that they're saying that they should have to take them into consideration. But the really interesting bit for me was that they've said also when they break down the timing of the sale. So they said you need to use the most comparable sale that's also the most recent. So if there's one that sold 1 week ago and one that sold 6 months ago, and they're both pretty similar, you need to use the one that's the most recent, which is, I think, a good idea taking into market effect. Again, like if I was an agent and I wanted to underquote, which a lot of agents do because they feel it's going to get the best result for the vendor and whatever, I can find so many ways to manipulate this to just very easily underquote. But there's also some problems that come with these guidelines. And this is what I found is the biggest issue with these is that real estate is so full of emotion and it's extremely subjective. And we've just talked about people, some people love California bungalows, some people love the Spanish mission designs, others hate them. And we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, but there was a sale recently in Paran that sold for $1 million over the top end of the quoted range. And it was like the talk of the town in the industry for a couple of weeks. It was a huge result. And yes, that property was underquoted, but the consensus was that it was underquoted maybe $100,000 or $200,000, which is still, that's still annoying, but that's what it was. But it sold for $1 million over the top of the range. And what we found out is that there was a bidding war between the neighbor who owned two of the other lots. So if he got this one, he was going to get 3 blocks in a row. And the other person that was bidding was the tenant who had lived in this property for years, right? And they loved it and they didn't want to move. So what you can see happen is that this property is worth more to those two individuals compared to the market. And everyone was saying that it sold for $600,000 to $800,000 more than comparable properties, which is huge. And it's a nuts result. But it was worth that amount to both of the parties that were involved. Now, the problem with these guidelines is that it says that you have to use the most recent comparable property on the street if it's relevant and within the 6 months. And one of the caveats on that is that it says if it's within the apartment complex within 6 months, like you have to use a sale in the apartment complex, which that makes a lot of sense to me. That's how we price apartments as well. But when it comes to stuff like on the street like this, and this emotional bidding can still happen for an apartment, it's out there. But if you were the neighbor or if you're 3 or 4 houses down on that street, these guidelines say that you are forced to use that result when creating your quoted range and the estimated sale price. That would stuff your campaign. If you were forced to list and there's been 12 sales in the suburb and 11 of them sold for 2.2 and this one sold for 3.2. If you then had to quote it at 2.7 or something and being in the middle, but it's actually worth 2.2 and the agents are suggesting let's quote it 1.8 to 1.9, which is probably what happens, then that's completely stuffed you. You just can't sell. If you're forced to do that as a quote, you should not sell within those 6 months because it would just completely ruin your campaign. You'd be on the market for 6 months. You'd probably have to reduce your price and then you might get a significantly worse result than if you were to quote how the market usually would have in the previous months.
Totally.
You've got to take that into consideration as well. It's why I think I'm not advocating underquoting there, but you do need to be realistic and you just need to know that there's emotion involved. I feel like these are a step up. In practice, if you're a buyer, I'd still expect underquoting.
Yeah, that's it. And I don't think it's going to change. I honestly just don't think it's going to fix the problem. There'll be people that will dodge stuff forever and they'll run the gauntlet just to test it. But yeah, I think it's going to add problems. Like some people will make money from this because they'll do training on it and like the agents are going to have to upskill and all of that kind of stuff. But I think ultimately, yeah, some people will take it seriously and a lot won't.
Yeah. And look, some markets underquote more than others, and I can't see them drastically changing their quotes overnight.
Yeah.
Let's wait and see.
That is it.
All right. Thanks for tuning in to How's the Market. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you could leave us a quick review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, as it really helps more people to find the show. For more tips, tools, and real talk in the Melbourne property market, head over to www.tommy.com and join the mailing list. You can also join the auction results list there on the website as well, or in the show notes below. Until next week, we'll catch you guys then. See ya.
See ya.